Promises to voters should Labour win the election. But what did he leave out? Do you trust the Labour leader to deliver on his promises any more than any other politician? We'll talk to the chair of the Labour Party live. Also tonight, these 4 men are haemophiliacs. As pupils together at the same boarding school, they were infected with deadly diseases like HIV and hepatitis. 80 of their school friends are dead as a result. They're all victims of the biggest NHS treatment scandal this country's ever seen, the contaminated blood scandal. They talk to us as the public inquiry prepares to publish its findings next week. Hi, good evening. While the Prime Minister was chatting on ITV's Loose Women today, the Labour leader was in Thurrock in Essex, a place Labour would need to win in the forthcoming election to get a majority. It pretty much felt like the unofficial starting gun on the whole campaign. Back in 1949, Nye Bevan said the language of priorities is the religion of socialism. And today we heard of Sir Keir Starmer's priorities. He laid out 6 pledges to voters should Labour win that election. Nothing new as such was announced, but with sleeves rolled up, jacket off and tieless, the message he was hoping to convey was he's ready to get cracking. Nick was there. How big a deal was today?
Well, Vic, as you say, it did rather have the feel of the launch of Labour's general election campaign, so a big personal focus on the leader, and then those first 6 steps that he would take if he were to win the general election. And it all had a rather familiar ring. I mean, do you remember 1997 and Tony Blair's 5 pledges? Now, Keir Starmer was keen to say today that he's his own man. This is no reprise of 1997. But why don't we just look at those 2 cards side by side? There you are, Labour on the left, 2024, Tony Blair in 1997, and you can see the similarities in presentational style. But there is a big difference. The Blair pledges were not overly ambitious, but they were quite specific. The Starmer steps were less specific, hence the whispers about whether he's being overly cautious. And there's an interesting example of this. So if you look at the 1997 one, in the bottom right-hand corner, no rise in income tax rates. If you look up the top left-hand of the one today, it talks about keeping taxes, inflation, mortgages as low as possible. Now, will Labour regret not being specific on that? Because the front page of the Daily Telegraph tomorrow, the front page of the Daily Express, banner headlines quoting the Chancellor saying that taxes will rise under Labour. Now, after that launch in Essex, I travelled to the true blue garrison town of Aldershot with the Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey. Labour recently took control of the council there, and I asked him whether this Labour offering now is all a bit too timid.
Well, the vision's there. What this is saying to people is we are ready. We're ready to roll up our sleeves. We're ready to do the hard graft to deliver the change that people want. And Keir Starmer said this morning, if I can't deliver it, I won't say it. And so what these 6 steps are the first things that Labour in government will do. As you can said, we can do some of them very quickly. So if people want better controls of Britain's borders, with the Tories having lost completely any control, then it's the steps to set up a national border command that can be done fast, that can be effective and will make a difference.
Now, John Healey has recently returned from Ukraine, so I asked him that if he becomes Defence Secretary, how would he approach that conflict?
I'm proud of Britain's leadership on Ukraine. I'm proud we were the first country to deliver main battle tanks, long-range missiles, training for their troops, and in future we will need to discuss and we will need to respond and encourage allies to respond as well to what Ukraine needs to stay in the fight, to fight and push the Russians back, and ultimately get to the point where they can launch negotiations and successfully re-establish their country in peacetime, but remaining sovereign with their own territorial integrity.
And finally, I asked John Healey about Natalie Elphicke. Now, he was instrumental in her defection because they've had a shared interest over a number of years in housing. And I said to John Healey, I asked him, did he do enough to alert the Labour Party to her baggage? She was a member of the Brexit European Research Group, and after her former husband was convicted on 2 counts of sexual assault, she obviously stood by him and appeared to be pretty critical of his victims.
I think most people in the country would say you'd expect to stand by your husband or your wife if they were in trouble. And most people would say if you're a Conservative MP, you'd have said bad things about the Labour Party. Labour MPs do that about the Conservatives. The really big decision, and it's a very profound decision because her friends, her colleagues, her staff have all been part of that Conservative network, was to say, I've given up on these. It's time to shift, and I'm willing to back Keir Starmer.
I should say that after her defection, Natalie Elphicke did apologise for those remarks.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Let's talk now to the Chair of Labour, Annalisa Dodds, who is also Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities. Thank you very much for talking to our audience this evening. Tony Blair, before the 1997 election, pledged no increase in income taxes. Sir Keir Starmer hasn't made that specific pledge. Should voters expect income tax to go up if Labour win the election?
Actually, Labour has been really clear that we don't believe working people should be paying the price for government mistakes. They certainly have under the Conservatives. We've seen taxes go up 25 times under the Conservatives. We would in fact potentially be seeing them going up in different directions if the government's unfunded £46 billion removal of national insurance went ahead. That would have to be soaked up somewhere else if it's not a cut, unfortunately, to the pension. And if it's not an increase in borrowing, then it would need to be coming from taxes. That's not Labour's approach. We would take different decisions on tax. We don't think, for example, that it's right if someone lives here that they cannot pay tax here. So we would plug those gaps in non-dom taxation. We would be cracking down on tax dodgers as well. We would use that money to deliver those extra NHS appointments that Keir was talking about today. But we want to see those taxes on working people ultimately coming down.
So why haven't you made a pledge
what's happened over recent years, which is that they've gone up.
Why haven't you made a pledge then?
Hang on.
Please let me finish the question. Why haven't you made a specific pledge today that income tax will not go up under a Labour government?
We've been very clear about our tax plans. We will announce those before the next general election, but above all,
they might go up.
They will be focused on that need to be because we will be focused on that need to be getting taxes on working people down. Unfortunately, taxes on working people have been going up under the Conservatives. So, frankly, I find the Conservatives' claims right now pretty difficult to understand when they've delivered that high tax burden.
I'm asking about your promises. I'm asking about your promises and the first steps that Sir Keir Starmer claims he would take should Labour win. Tony Blair was obviously able to rule this out back in 1997. Perhaps you could then explain to voters why you're keeping the option open of raising income tax.
No, we've said that we want those taxes on working people to be coming down. We've been really clear about that. We've also said that we will set our tax plans out in full before the next general election. We're never going to put our country in the kind of situation that we saw just a few months ago from now, which many people watching this will still be suffering from. That situation when we had tax plans announced by Liz Truss that people are still paying for now.
Are you able to say tonight, Annalisa Dodds, forgive me,
British public?
It feels a very straightforward question from my point of view. Are you able to say tonight then to Newsnight viewers, we're not going to put income tax up?
So Rachel Reeves has been very clear that she would not be putting up income taxes. She would not be putting up taxes on working people, and she will be setting out our tax plans in full before the next general election. I don't think there's any lack of clarity from the Labour side on these questions. I think, however, we have seen smoke and mirror from the Conservative side because they put up taxes time and again on working people.
OK. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation's most recent figures suggest that 3.8 million people experienced destitution in 2022, a million of them children, defined as being unable to meet some of the most basic needs like staying dry, clean, warm and fed. Your former Prime Minister Gordon Brown was talking yesterday about the numbers of children in poverty. Why isn't that worthy of a place on the Labour Party's pledge card today?
Well, we're absolutely determined to ensure that just as the previous Labour government took a huge number of children out of poverty, 1 million children out of poverty, that we would have a really strong anti-poverty strategy. And that's not divorced at all from the first steps that we set out today, because if you look at the drivers of poverty in our country, you see, for example, that the economic instability that we've had over the last few years, the lack of sustainable growth, the poor living standards, they've led to that situation where we have so many families living in poverty. So delivering economic stability, getting our country building again, those other economic measures will be absolutely critical, but also delivering those opportunities for children and young people as well. We set out those plans to recruit 6,500 additional teachers today because we know that those children deserve that support in school, that when they have that support, that will revolutionise their life chances.
We played a clip earlier of your Shadow Cabinet colleague John Healey telling Nick that when Natalie Elphicke criticised the victims of her husband's sexual assault, that was, in his words, Mrs Elphicke standing by her husband. That's a hell of a positive spin, isn't it?
Well, actually, Natalie Elphicke apologised for those comments. She was clearly right to do so. She made clear that she was wrong in making those comments, and she said she wanted to say very clearly that she was sorry to those who'd been impacted. You know, I think she's made that very clear in the statement that she released.
Thank you very much for talking to our audience tonight, Annalisa Dodds. Thank you. Chair of the Labour Party, Annalisa Dodds. Next, these 4 men, as young boys, were sent by their parents to a boarding school for disabled children in Hampshire in the 70s and 80s called Lord Mayor Trelaw. Each boy was born with haemophilia, a genetic condition that prevents the blood's ability to clot. The school had medical facilities on site, which meant they could be treated and then be back at their desk pretty swiftly. The idea being they could have as normal an education as was possible despite their condition. While there, officials at the school gave haemophiliac pupils new blood treatments. The blood they were given was contaminated, and as a result, all 4 were unwittingly infected with HIV and/or hepatitis. The same happened to their school friends. At least 80 have since died. The long-running public inquiry into what has been called the worst treatment disaster in NHS history is preparing to publish its final report next week. So let me introduce our guest tonight then to you. Aid Goodyear was infected with HIV, hepatitis B and hepatitis C. He thinks he was age 13 when this happened. Gary Webster was infected with HIV and hepatitis C. He was 17 when he was infected. Steve Nichols was infected with hepatitis B and C. He reckons he was around 9 years old when that happened. Richard Warwick was infected with HIV, hepatitis B and hepatitis C. He was between the ages of 13 and 14 when that happened. And Tina Warwick is here too. Tina and Richard got married 33 years ago. Welcome all of you, welcome to Newsnight. Thank you very much for being with us. And in fact, just before we came on air, you just told me that you were also exposed to variant CJD, otherwise known as the human form of mad cow disease. When did you find that out?
After we'd left college, we had letters from, I can't remember which, it was a health authority, it wasn't anything to do with Trelawn's, it was a health authority, say a batch of products that you'd received, a donor that gave blood that was in that batch has since developed BCJD, mad cow disease, or subsequently died. There is no test for it. They can't test you for it. The only way they'll know if you've got it is when you're dead, and they basically dissect your brain. That is the only way to find out. We know we've all been exposed to it, so it's another ticking time bomb, really.
You are obviously preparing for the final report after the 4-year-long public inquiry next week. Does this feel like a huge moment, Aid?
Huge. I mean, we waited 40 years for this moment, and I hope the ways of justice will watch over us on Monday, that we get to own our justice, and that is shown by Sir Brian for us and the families that we've lost, because we've lost so many people. I say 80 people, 3,000 around the country, and how many families are there, how many husbands are there, how many people have been through this. And so we hope for all those people that I know that we've all agreed we're looking for contrition.
You're looking for contrition?
Contrition.
Okay, what does contrition mean to you?
I think we all want to know exactly what went on, and we want justice, and you know, we don't want any more cover-ups. There's been so many cover-ups over the years. We've been fighting for years to get this inquiry and to find out the truth, and we all need that, all the families, all the children, all the parents, and us as well.
Steve, what are your thoughts as you await this final report?
Absolutely, I agree with everything that's been said. We're looking for our stories to be validated, for people to realise that what we were saying for 40 years actually happened. So many people have looked in the past at us in disbelief and said, no, they wouldn't have done that to children. They wouldn't, but they did. But they did it knowingly. We feel that we were used as guinea pigs, as laboratory rats, as children. We feel Trelaws were undertaking unethical trials that were only be able to take them there because we had no safety net. Our parents signed us, their little boys, their 8 and 9-year-old boys' care over to Trelaws. They signed a form giving Trelaws loco parentis. They were acting as our parents. And we were given no choice. Our parents were given no choice. It was all done behind closed doors, secretively. And that was wrong. Experimentation on children was wrong. It's wrong now today as it was back in the 70s and the 80s.
Richard, what are your thoughts?
I think as far as the inquiry report's concerned, I think most people want to see accountability. They want the government's feet held to the fire. Some people would like to see people responsible locked up, you know. As far as some sort of restitution is concerned, I think people just want answers. They just want closure. They want closure to this. The book closed on this saga that's lasted for 5 decades. They want to see the families have some sort of security for the long run, so that they can forget about all this. Because every time it's brought up in the House of Commons, or every time we've tried to push to get somewhere, we've just been kicked back again and again and again. And this has happened from, obviously, successive governments have taken this line, that there was nothing to see here.
Yeah. We'll talk about financial redress, and we'll talk much more about how it happened to you, and we'll hear from you, Tina, as well. We're grateful for your time. I know you've never spoken publicly before. We're just going to bring in our health reporter now, Jim Reid. Jim, you've been covering this for how many years now?
Best part of a decade now, which is just a small proportion of the overall scandal, obviously.
And so, in terms of the inquiry, what have we learned when it comes to how many people were affected by contaminated blood?
Well, Vic, you were just talking about 80 boys dying at just one school. I think
let's just pause for a moment. 80 in one school is just outrageous.
One of the first things that the inquiry did was to try to get an idea, a handle on the overall numbers infected. And I think it's worth going through those numbers because they are stark, to say the least. So if we look, overall now we think something around 33,000 people were affected in this scandal. Roughly 3,000 have died. There are 2 main groups of people affected. There are people with the blood disorder haemophilia. We're hearing from 4 of those people today. We now think roughly 1,200, 1,300 of that group were infected with HIV, and between 2,500 and 5,000 with hepatitis C, which can be a debilitating disease can lead to cirrhosis and liver cancer. And then there's a second group of people who were affected. Now, these are people who've had a blood transfusion after, for example, a car accident or childbirth. And we now think roughly 27,000 in that group would have been infected with hepatitis C, and a much smaller number, between kind of 80 and 100, with HIV. And these are all big figures, but I think when you take them as a whole, we are talking, as you said at the beginning, about literally the biggest treatment disaster since the NHS was founded in 1948.
Right. And how did it happen? How did contaminated blood arrive in this country?
Well, it's complex. So if we just talk about people with haemophilia at the moment, we have to go back to the 1970s. A whole new type of treatment for haemophilia was being used. It was called either factor 8 or factor 9 concentrate, depending on what form of haemophilia you had. And it promised to be something, it was marketed as something of a wonder drug, allowed people to live a very normal life. You took a powder from the fridge, you injected yourself. It wasn't like the older treatments where you needed to go into hospital. There were two key problems with it. The first was how it was manufactured. It came from pooling or mixing literally tens of thousands of blood donations. So if there was just one person who was donating who was infected with a virus, it could contaminate the entire batch. At the same time, the NHS was really struggling to keep up with demand. So it was often being imported, this is in the 70s, beginning of the 80s, from abroad, often the United States. There, people who were giving blood were getting paid to donate. Not the case in this country. Was and is the case in the United States. And that led to this sort of incentive where people who really needed money were more likely to donate, and also less likely maybe to be open about their medical history. And so viruses were getting into the system. And that was the case through the 1970s and into the 1980s, when HIV and AIDS became very prevalent.
OK. Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you. And Jim's panorama, by the way, on this, which went out on Monday night, is available on iPlayer for the next year. Thank you, Jim. Let's go back to your school days then, because the idea of having a clinic on site, I'm guessing, was a good idea for you, for your parents. You thought that would be great. Why?
Well, as correspondent said there, factor 8 was sold as a wonder drug. And before that, I personally couldn't go to a normal school, so it was decided that I went to Treelaws. I was on cryoprecipitate before that.
That was a safe treatment.
That was a safe drug, only made by maybe 4 or 5 different donations, whereas factor 8 by thousands. And it was sold as a wonder drug. We could play football, we could go out, do normal things that we'd never been able to do before.
Did any of the staff or the medics talk to you or your parents about the new blood treatments and about whether there were any risks involved?
Not the one.
Not
the one. Never.
So did they get consent to give you these new treatments?
No.
No informed consent at all.
Never even told us, let alone our parents.
Right.
That was the main problem, is that there was no communication to speak of at all between the college haematologists and our parents. So every time treatment was changed, unknowing to us, our parents, neither we knew nor our parents were told that change was taking place.
I mean, that just seems unbelievable. You know, OK, it's the 70s and 80s. It's not that long ago, is it?
And that was for that whole period of time.
Yeah.
They were supposed to phone our parents with every single treatment change, every time they changed from one company to another, commercial or BPL. That was supposed to happen. It never happened.
A series of prophylaxis trials where you'd be given sort of 2 or 3 doses of factor 8 every week. The idea being it was preventative.
Yes.
The problem was, rather than sticking to one batch from one manufacturer, which was a far safer option, even if it meant it was going to be 20 or 30,000 donors, what they did was they interchanged manufacturers and batches from different manufacturers, so you were exponentially getting more and more. The risk was increasing each day.
When did you first get a sense that something was wrong, Steve?
I think to us it was all very normal when we were actually at college, because everybody was doing it. All the boys, we were all put on prophylaxis and having 3 or 4 injections a week. I think we the first alarm bells were raised. It wasn't so much they were putting so much in, but they were taking so much out. Every time you were having an injection, they were taking copious amounts of blood out, and then an hour later they'd want more. And we think, well, why was that? And we'd be called out of class, they'd come and you'll do your blood tests. And this was not daily, but weekly, 2-3 times a week, and the amount of blood they took from us.
So do you think now they were testing you to see if you,
we know.
They were testing for hepatitis,
categorically,
they were testing for HIV?
See the evidence.
Yeah.
They were, right, okay.
How would come on you in art class and then suddenly you had to go to the centre for a blood test at 11 o'clock, well, why?
And it even got as far as serious to say that if you didn't turn up to have your blood test, you were punished.
Yeah.
You were given black marks, you were given detentions.
Wow.
For not complying?
Gary, I understand that you were told in particularly brutal fashion that you had HIV. Can you tell our audience what happened?
Well, I was called out of school lessons with my best friend at the time, and we were asked to go up to sick bay, as it was called, into the doctor's office. There was a staff nurse there, haemophilia nurse, and basically he just said, I've got something to tell you, we're not sure we know much about it, but you've been infected with this virus. And we sort of looked at each other, didn't really know what to ask, but we said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, we can't really say, but you probably won't be alive in 2 years. And then
because it was HIV?
Yeah, and we went back to class.
Are you joking?
No.
So how did you process that? You were what, 17?
Yeah, I suppose it was easier to process because I was amongst 60 other boys that had told the same. Right. But I don't know really. I don't know what we did, to be perfectly honest.
But I do know that all of you, to a greater or lesser extent, with your friendship group at the time, essentially made deals, made pacts, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah, I think we've kept in touch really since we left school, and I think it's that comradeship, you know, the fact that we can talk to each other and share our stories and support each other. I think that's what's helped us in the long run to keep us together and keep us going.
But what was the promise that you made to each other, Steve?
Yeah.
I can remember in 1983 when the link had just been made with regard to haemophilia and HIV, and we categorically know now that in the very early January or February of 83, the haemophilia doctor at Trelaws was present at a meeting at Heathrow, so it's categoric that he knew from January or February 83, categoric, and they just carried on as normal. But you've mentioned cryoprecipitate, which was deemed the safest product on the market. When you look back at the Trelaw records for 1983, Trelaws used zero cryoprecipitate. It was all commercial products.
Yeah, there was a blatant disregard for the safety and the lives of the children that were down there during that time.
And they took 2 years, at least 2.5 years, before we was in an office saying that you haven't got HIV or not. I mean, imagine that we didn't know, the parents didn't know, 2.5 years. Yeah. Before
Someone
they finally
knew
said
somewhere.
anything.
Someone knew somewhere within that college.
No.
The doctors knew. We are convinced the headmaster knew. We know from his written evidence and oral statement he gave at the inquiry that he was having weekly meetings with the haemophilia doctor. Weekly meetings. What were they talking about?
Yeah. We have got a statement, I think, from the school, which hopefully we can show you because I'm going to have to read it off the screen. But while we bring that up, here it is. This national scandal has devastated countless lives, including those of our former students and their families. Rightly, a public inquiry was set up to understand what happened, and we've been part of that process. We await the report's publication and hope that it provides our former students who were infected and their families with the answers they deserve. You essentially pledged to each other and others that whichever of you survived, and you are 4 of the survivors, obviously, you would find out the truth for those who have died.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that is part of your mission, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How would you say this has affected your lives? What impact has it had?
Tough question.
Destroyed all of our lives to a certain extent. You know, a lot of us have been unable to get mortgages, life insurance, pensions. We've all had to give up work, all of us. You know, I left college knowing I was going to a job. So I had that to think about as well after being told you've probably got 2 years. So yeah, it's totally destroyed everyone's lives.
unimaginable stigma to start with, total loss of a place in society, as Gary said, not being able to get the things that people take for granted, like life insurance and health insurance, mortgages. So there's just nothing there. I don't know, neither of us really know what it feels like to live a normal life that someone, an adult would live, someone growing up would live. We just haven't experienced that. So.
And Tina and Richard, you've been married for 33 years, and in 1989 you became pregnant, unwittingly I think, and you wanted that child, but what advice were you given?
Well, it's all a bit of a blur for me back then, but Richard especially remembers us being absolutely told unequivocally that we needed a termination.
Because?
Because there was a possibility maybe I was infected because we'd had an accident. Richard wasn't expected to live very long. We lived every day in fear, every cough, is this the start of the end? You see all the dreadful images of those poor young men in the end stages of their lives. Was I all right? Was the baby all right? Was it morally right to bring a baby into that sort of situation? So at the time it almost wasn't a decision, it just had to be. And it's only later, you think, what if, and realise what you've missed out on. And, but at the time, it's all a bit of a blur.
How do you rationalise, if that's the right word, maybe you haven't rationalised, the fact that you haven't been able to have children?
Oh God, that's a really, really difficult question for both of us.
You haven't really had time to think about it, have you? Because not too long after that, even though he started to get a little bit better on the new therapies for HIV, and we just thought, well, maybe life is possible, because of this. He was a little bit better from everything that he's been experiencing, and then the hepatitis C started to rear its head, and he started to have symptoms of that, and also the treatment for that. The interferon treatments, he had to undergo 2 rounds of that, and that was absolutely dreadful. I don't know how we'd have coped if we'd have had a child, to be honest, going through that. Yeah. But just now and again, at odd times, you see someone, with a pram or with a new baby, and you realise it's not going to be. But the years go by, and you just have to put it to the back of your mind and get on with things, because there's been so much else to think about.
Sure. Has there been anger?
Just a bit. Yeah, as Tina says, it's just
resentment.
Resentment is the word. Yeah, resentment. And sadness. Yeah. Deep sadness.
Listening to it comes out in odd ways. Listening to one of the very first people to give evidence at the inquiry when it all started, and he was a smashing young chap, very similar to Richard in his age and what he'd been through. And he talked about his children, and I got irrationally angry listening to his evidence. I couldn't concentrate on what he was saying, and I had to wait till the break and go to the toilet and have a word with myself, because I was so angry. I suppose that's just
because
one of the ways
it came out. Because he'd had children and you didn't.
I was thinking, how? Why? How come?
Yeah.
It just hits you.
I don't even think that's irrational, Tina. I don't think that's irrational. It's probably rational anger,
Yeah.
What do you want from this inquiry? What does justice look like, Aid?
Apology at every single level, from every medical person, trust, politician that was involved, and today. Apology.
Gary?
Yeah, I think we want to know why it happened, I think we know why it happened, down to cost and things like that, and we weren't self-sufficient in this country, but that's no excuse, because doctors, politicians, pharmaceutical companies knowingly sold and accepted this factor 8, factor 9. Knowingly it was infected with hepatitis C, later HIV. So, yeah, we want Sir Brian to lay it down, lay it out, and start criticising and blaming people, I think.
Sir Brian is the retired judge who's in charge of the inquiry. Steve, what do you want when this report comes out on Monday?
I think we are going to learn very little from we've seen the evidence,
Yeah.
we lived it all.
Yeah.
We know, we don't quite understand why and how it was allowed to happen. They're the answers we want, and obviously we want validation. We want the truth. That is the most important. The truth and the cover-up must come out. And then the finger should point. People should be held to account. You know, if there's criminal findings, those people should be tried.
Okay. Well, let's bring in Caroline Wheeler now, political editor of the Sunday Times, who has been reporting on the infected blood story for 2 decades and has written a book about it, Death in the Blood. Caroline, thank you for being with us. Aid, Richard, Steve and Gary have received interim compensation of £100,000 each, along with 400 victims and some bereaved partners. Who else is going to be eligible as far as your sources know?
So there's going to be a compensation package which we believe could come as soon as next week, in the days after the inquiry reports back. My understanding is that already the government has made a commitment that that interim payment, which has so far just been given to the infected and bereaved partners and spouses, will be then extended to the children who have lost parents and the parents who have lost children. And one of the questions that we're still grappling with at the moment is how that's going to be paid and whether that's going to recognise those individuals in their own right, or whether it will be an estates payment, which will create some anomalies, because obviously in some instances some of the children, you know, died later in life and they may have already been married, so their partners may have already received some of the compensation. So there are still some questions about how that interim payment's going to work. But more broadly speaking, my understanding is that the government are now committed to paying compensation to both the infected and the affected, and that they are going to prioritise further payments to the infected living. Now, how that works out and how that shapes up is still very much to be seen.
And when?
And indeed, you know, even if there's an announcement which could come as soon as Tuesday, it's still about how quickly they can get that money into people's bank accounts. Now, I think that's what people like me and Jim will be poring over next week, to see just how much of a commitment the government is going to put behind this, because obviously, as you know, we're in an election year and it's really important now that we see very swift action, because obviously we're seeing 2 people still dying who've been involved in this scandal every week. And I think sometimes there's a misconception about this, that this is a historic scandal, that it's something that happened years ago. It's not something that's still live and ongoing, and that just isn't the case. There are people that I'm in touch with even now who are just in the most horrific of circumstances, who have been enduring all the things that the Trelaws boys here have talked to you about, who, you know, have struggled financially for decades, who haven't been able to work, who haven't been able to have families, and who really need access to funding now to support themselves.
Because people who survived have lost so much, as we've heard this evening. What about the ramifications when it comes to any potential criminal proceedings for politicians who may still be alive, for medics who may still be alive?
Well, what we do know is that the inquiry has delayed publishing its findings twice now. And actually the reason that's been cited in both those instances has been the Maxwellisation process, because the judge, Sir Brian Langstaff, has been contacting people and letting them know who is going to be criticised in the report. And my understanding is that there have been a huge number of people that have been criticised and have received that letter offering them opportunity to respond to that. So I think it's very likely that we will see a very damning report and individuals named and blamed as part of this process.
Okay. And I gather that you are taking legal action against the school, and I'm guessing that, you know, when you get that report, when you read it, you will have in your mind all those school friends who've died.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Yeah. And that's the main reason why we brought this action, or it stayed at the moment, because obviously we wait to see what the report says. But yeah, we want to make sure that everyone at Trelaws is compensated and told the truth, and that includes people that are no longer here, their families and siblings and children, everyone.
Yeah. The 80 lost boys,
yes,
their parents, their wives, their children, if they had any, we will not stop until we get the justice that they deserve.
Absolutely.
We promise them.
Yeah.
We promise them.
And that is the ripple effect that I think Jim was talking about half an hour or so ago. So many people, I mean, you have lost so much, as you've just described, and you, Tina, as well. But so many people have been affected. You know, there are kids. There's one boy who was on the BBC website earlier this week, Sam. He's lost his mum, his dad, and his little baby sister. I mean, he deserves to be compensated, right?
Absolutely.
His dad was a tree laws boss.
They were tree law boys.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
When
And so many campaigners along the way, not just the Tree Laws boys. We've lost so many campaigners
Throughout the country.
throughout the whole campaign. Good men and ladies, you know, who've given their lives to this campaign. And they deserve to see justice as well.
750 plus since the start of, since the inquiry was launched in 2018. So
have died.
Have died. Yeah.
How many?
About 780.
Good God.
Yeah.
So the government need to act after this and get on with it.
Yeah. Before an election.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm really grateful for your time this evening. Thank you so much, Tina and Richard and Steve and Gary and Aid, and obviously Caroline Wheeler and Jim Reid. I'm going to bring you a little flavour of tomorrow's front pages. I think we're starting with the Telegraph. Labour tax rises as sure as night follows day, says the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. The Times, bed blocker crisis means extra NHS cash wasted. Front page of The Guardian, ministers were warned in 2021 about the carers scandal. And a picture of Sir Keir Starmer, no quick fix if Labour wins the election. And the Daily Mail, don't betray our Royal Mail. The Business Secretary warns firms' bosses she won't allow a £3.5 billion sale to a Czech billionaire without guarantees on postal services. Thank you very much for watching tonight. Thank you for your company. Faisal is here tomorrow. Till then, good night. Well done.